Ray, why don't you talk to us a little bit about how we should respond and lead in this crisis?
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think one of the first responses that we need to do is communicate exactly what has happened to our peers, what is happening to us, and how we're dealing with that. I always would make it a point to put together a few communications, PowerPoint slides and decks, and do that with our executive management, do that with all of our leaders within the company, and then specifically put together a presentation that I regularly update the board with on just those items. Very specifically, what has happened, what's happening to us, what's happening to our peers, what are we doing to prevent additional issues from happening to us, and what kind of communication we're having with our peers. That seems to work extremely well. The board appreciates it, senior management appreciates it, and then the next case, the next situation would be to make sure I do that regularly. Promise a time period, whether it's going to be every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, that would be great. Putting together 2 plans. One, what are we going to do with our 2020 BAU activities? And number 2, what are our tactical plans that we need to get together and work on right now, and how we're going to move forward with that, especially in this remote working environment.
Great. Thanks for that, Ray. JP, how about you?
Yeah, if you think about it, all of us as leaders, we tend to prepare for a possible crisis and handle it effectively when it comes without losing a perspective and a cool. But if you take the current times, it's literally disrupted most of our assumptions, most of our historical experience-based decisions. So I think there are a couple of things that we really have to keep in the forefront of our mind. A calm rationality, tireless action, and crystal clear communication. I think if we look at those 3 legs of the stool, then you have a stable stool to deal with. And in all this, as we work through this, I think the first thing that I believe in is, in any crisis mode is short-circuiting the denial. The sooner you get through that, the better. Adaptation on the fly, while you don't lose your head, is key. We got to stay flexible and innovative. That means you got to, again, going back to my adaptation piece, I think we all have sort of the theme of war rooms. In other ways, call it our incident response or IRPs or otherwise in terms of crisis, security-wise or otherwise. But you sort of have to have a war room plan in place. And whether it's a small crisis or a big disaster or pandemic, on how you get through, and that again ties to communication that's crystal clear and that's upwards, downwards, and horizontally. And we'll talk more about that, how do you deal with the ecosystem and things around you. And really, I think at the end of the day, you have to become the trusted source of information in the times of crisis like this. So I'll pause there, James, but I think those are the basis of how I operate and some of the beliefs that I incorporate into my workings.
That's great. Thank you, JP. And thanks, Ray. So let's dive into that a bit more. So clearly, some of the issues that are being faced today include cybersecurity, right, and bandwidth, and access, and remote engagement, remote work. So let's talk about those a little bit. Again, as a CISO, as a CIO, as an IT leader, what are some of the strategies that you can share how you might respond and are responding?
Yeah, in my world, James, I would say there's some positives and negatives to that. In some cases, many firms today were set up for remote work. Yes, it's putting some bandwidth constraints on. Yes, it's looking at people who might not have certificates on their devices that need to now access a secure site. There's a lot of different things happening that it's a bit of a shift or a change from what was happening before. What I see is a lot of the firms are dealing quite well with that. I'm not hearing. I do know some large financial institutions that choked in the beginning, but are getting through that quite well right now. Believe it or not, I see a lot of the choking and the strategies of trying to deal with home networks and home pipe bandwidth and whatnot seem to be breaking a lot of things down. We're not used to having 3, 4, 5, 6 members at home looking at Zooms and Teams and Skypes all at the same time. So that seems to be choking a lot of things. But other than that, we just need to make sure that the proper security is in place for that remote connectivity. And that's where we want to look at what's being done for our privileged access individuals who are now working from home, who prior to that needed to work only at a certain workstation with a certain IP address at a certain time of day. All that's going crazy. Anybody that has user behavior analytics in place, that's all giving amazingly different metrics than we had before. So those types of things we're trying to keep up with.
Thanks, Ray. How about you, JP?
Yeah, I couldn't emphasize more. I think Ray's right on spot there. I think remote access is least of our issues in today's day and age. I think connectivity is much better than it was a year ago or 24 months ago or 36 months ago. It's only gotten better. So connectivity is call it less of a hurdle, but security at large, I think that's really the biggest concern right now. If you look at the recent the Zoom news that came out, that folks were able to come in and bomb those meetings. If you can get into a meeting, you could potentially listen to it. Just talking to a neighbor here, she works for BlackRock, and they actually had to ban all video conversations and third-party platforms until they were able to quickly figure out and lock down some of the security, because some of the discussions that were happening in that were critical to the clients, critical to asset purchases, divestitures, and otherwise. So those internal conversations that we're so comfortable having every day, all of a sudden when it's fully remote, I think people learn to collaborate. But the security on technology has surfaced as the biggest challenge at hand. And I think you're going to see some new opportunities coming out of this that allows the companies to invest quicker, better, to have a much better baseline in terms of security going forward. So as much as this is a threat and a challenge today, I think it allows us to leapfrog ahead and recover from it and have a new baseline. So security is key.
Got it. And what we've seen is, at least some of the recent news, is that some clients are moving from Zoom to Microsoft and Skype. So you're seeing some dynamism here in the marketplace. And so that's interesting to watch as things sort of shake out. So, and clearly, as far as the bandwidth, I think, as far as what I've been reading, and you folks can clarify and confirm, in the States, we've been holding up pretty well. At least the infrastructure has been holding up compared to Europe, for example. So that's really good, and that's really comforting to know. Hopefully that will stay, and that won't be a concern of ours. So you folks have a lot of staff right now that are essential to the operations now more than ever, almost. So how does that factor in how leadership should manage in this crisis with their teams, with all the things that are going on, hoping that all people working in IT or everywhere are safe and healthy.
James, I see two types of staff going on right now. I see the essential staff that you spoke about, who are having to work very differently. These are the people that have the privilege access, the people that are performing patching, the people that are performing new installations, upgrades, etc. A lot of that normally was done on site, and it was done on site with security, with people that were brought into buildings. They were escorted, they were background checked, they were given access, only access under their own IDs, with visitor status, et cetera, et cetera. All that kind of has gone away. Right now, that remote access for companies that are not requiring those types of things to be done on site, that remote access has changed things. People are opening up firewalls willy-nilly just to get some emergency fixes done. People are opening up different access points that we can't necessarily discern that the person performing the adjustments, the upgrades, the testing are those people that say they are who they're supposed to be. So there's, in general, security that's being bypassed. That needs to be looked at, monitored through our SIM, monitored through our logs, sometimes where we fall back on. People need to go and pay attention to those logs. We're going to have less people out there looking at those logs. That stuff needs to be done. So in my mind, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that needs to be done. And one of the things, and I'll let JP opine on some others' thoughts, but then I can also talk about some opportunities that we might have during this time. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay, JP, why don't you take it from there? But I want to encourage people to also submit questions starting now, so we can ask those questions of our, great participants, panelists here. JP?
Sure. Thanks, Jim, Ray. Yeah, I think if you really look at that managing up, down, and across the organization concept, there couldn't be a better time to test those concepts, test your own abilities as a leader. I think managing up is as important as managing down. You've got to lead by example on both ends, whether you're managing the expectations upwards to the food chain, whether it's expectations to what to expect, what we can deliver, what can or cannot be done. There has to be some pushback, and not simply jump when somebody tells you to jump and ask how high. Especially in times like this, I think the actions you take, that drives the credibility of the brand you represent, and that really ties to managing down. Is really empower people in times like this, rather than sort of lead the herd a certain path. I think especially in a distributed environment, folks are going through tough circumstances to adapt in their work environment, dealing with family challenges, dealing with the unknowns at work. Ray just mentioned a few. I think the overall stress is high. So you got to empower people to be more creative, take actions timely rather than wait for the next call. Time is of the essence, especially when the workforce is all distributed in the current times. And then managing across, I think, to your peers and, ecosystem of partners and whatnot. Again, I think it comes down to the credibility and reasonableness of your approach as a leader. And communication really becomes key. And you have to be empathetic in that communication, but at the same time, call out things that would, be obvious for us to trip on. And more importantly, lead the way on how we could most likely avoid the places we can trip. But there will be lessons learned, no doubt. I think Ray made a good point earlier. There will be, those lessons learned. Looking, through the mirror, there's always going to be hindsight 2020. But I think we're going to have to, manage through this. At the same time, be open to collection of ideas and a post-mortem that should be done in every organization on what we prepared for, what held, what did not hold very well, and what are the things that are the new priority on a list if you take the top 10 list on your ongoing task list that should be addressed quickly and timely.
Thanks, JP. Let's flip it back to you, Ray. I know you had some other points you wanted to mention, but you have to take the mute off.
Some of the things I'd like to talk about are, we now have an opportunity actually to look at this and as a small gift. While I said there's several people that are scurrying to get certain things done that need to get done for security, there's also a lot of people that really feel frustrated and are unable to do their business as usual work. And so I would encourage people to take their time and to look at this opportunity now to engage in remote pen testing, application vulnerability testing, fixing up their security scorecards and making them more compliant, continuing to perform their remote vendor assessments and updating their policies and standards, especially those around remote access, providing training on phishing. The remote training on phishing could be done now just so amazingly quick and make it so relevant to the situation that's going on. That would be great. Looking at our crisis management plans, all of our firewall access reviews, patching assessments, what's actually been done, what's not been done, and probably another dozen other items that can be done remotely, can be done well remotely, and can fill in from the work side for those people that are sort of kind of waiting for the next steps of what's to happen.
Thank you, Ray. Now I'd like to go through, before we get to questions, there's another point about communications. Now, everyone is dealing with, as we know, not only internal staff and colleagues, but vendors and customers. Can each of you talk to us about how leaders, how professionals in the IT space should be behaving and managing?
Sure, I can pitch in on that. So, in my view, comms is a lifeline in any crisis, right? And at the core of it, when you look at crisis communication, it sort have to be built around 4 pillars: honesty, transparency, accountability, and then consistency of the messaging, right? So if you take all that and put on the mixer, that sort of becomes a good recipe for a good dish that you can cook in terms of comms. And I think you're looking at it the right way, that you got to look at the overall ecosystem around you that includes your enterprise and vendors and customers. I think you're either drawing from it or you're serving the community. It's a mix of both in many cases. So for a company to survive, I think you really have to take a holistic approach around that. And if I specifically talk about communication with your customers, maybe let me address that quickly, at least in my view, how we are doing it. Let's show that you care in your communication. Be proactive in that communication, not always be in a catch-up mode, because then it's just another communication going to your customers if it's not timely. Offer a shoulder to lean on. I think there'll be folks who probably won't be happy with your brand for certain things, and you're gonna have to have an outlet to listen in, a post to listen in on that, whether it's digital or a phone line or whatnot. And then at the end of the day, once you get past the crisis or at a certain periods within the crisis, I think you've got to audit everything that's coming in through that listening post, and then make sure that you're able to respond again, it's a reiterative loop. So you got to keep the loop live, right? So I think if I talk about quickly on your own organization and vendors or partners, I think the whole concept of supply chain comes to mind, James. And what should we think about in that scenario? I mean, let's start with the people. That's first. The welfare and safety of our people and people who serve us, from the vendor or partner side is paramount. So you got to put a lot of weight, a lot of effort into thinking about their safety, and I think that allows a culture that people are giving their best, because you're taking that whole anxiety out of the equation to say, yes, my safety is considered, my family is not going to worry about it. Allows you to focus more and give your best output in times like this. And then maintain a healthy skepticism in your approach. And then I'll leave you with run outage scenarios to assess the possibility of unforeseen impacts. So again, tabletop drills, is one way to do it. But when you're in the times of crisis, I think you still have to maintain some of that approach. Again, it'll vary from the company to what size and shape and stage of life and how you're structured to deal with it. But you still have to be able to run some outage scenarios to say, if this thing lasts 4 weeks and I'm 2 weeks into it, how have we done? How we're going to survive the next 2 weeks, and some of the unforeseens, if you can dig up, then you're better prepared. And I'll leave you with this, which is truly, how I operate in my operational theory is prevention is better than cure. So if you can prevent some of those outages, then I think it's much better than curing it later. So, Ray, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I fully agree with JP. I think those are the opportunities we need to look at. Those are the types of things we need to prevent. This is the time of we can actually look at those war games and those desktop activities that we put in place that we either did have in place, plan to have in place, or maybe want to work on now. That's certainly something also we can look at from a remote standpoint and see how we can get those war games and how those desktop exercises and how they would work. This is what it was meant for. So, something to get moving on.
Great. Thank you both. I think we covered a lot of ground there. I think it was very helpful. But before we get to questions, I wanted to ask you to share just one thing, a takeaway, a nugget of wisdom for IT leaders so that they can remember one thing to really consider during this crisis and future crises. Let's go with you, JP.
Sure. So I think I would encourage all my colleagues out there and fellows in similar roles, irrespective of what role you're playing in. You could be a CEO or CISO, CIO. You're some CXO at the end of the day, and you have an integral role to play. And it's like being on a team on the field. If we're going to have to win that game, then we all have to play our part at its best. So the general awareness in that concept is very crucial and critical. So let's just continue with the concept of you being on the ground in a football field, a general awareness of what your role is, what's around you, what's happening, and how quickly you need to adapt or play your part. I think your reflexes are important. So to that effect, I would encourage you to sort of take a fresh inventory with the concept of know all your suppliers, because it matters. I mean, we have had some recent challenges in my current organization where we thought we had everything buttoned down, but still life happens. So know all your suppliers, understand your critical vulnerabilities, and take actions to avoid the spread of the risk. That means, to Ray's point earlier about, if you don't have a good baseline on your cybersecurity threat landscape, or operational landscape, or the stability of your landscape or systems, then I think you should dig up those vulnerabilities if you haven't already, and please take a fresh assessment of that. It allows you to be proactive in really, and I'll sort of close on this note, is and really refresh your business continuity plan. We used to call it disaster recovery, and we've gone through quite a few iterations of that journey. But really, at the end of the day, it's a business continuity plan, and systems only exist if the business exists. So, and again, please don't forget your people. I think they are the most crucial piece of this machinery on a day-to-day basis, but especially in times of crisis.
Great. Thank you, JP. Share with us just one thing, Ray.
Sure. I think as a leader, we're going to be looked at to share appropriate information. And I think we've seen a lot of leaders in the media over the last several weeks, and we can probably, in our own opinions, decide who is a good leader and who is not a good leader. And I think the good leaders are the people that are sharing accurate and confidently sharing accurate information that is absolutely critical. Don't worry about sharing 100 pieces. Share the top 5 or top 10, but be 100% accurate with those pieces of information. And be there to take questions, to answer questions, communicate to the board, communicate to executive management, and continue to move forward with other exercises that can be done right now remotely. Just don't stop in our tracks. There's no reason to stop for 6 months on what we needed to do. Just talking to a bunch of people today about their 2020 roadmaps. Take apart that roadmap and decide which types of things can be done remotely. Move forward with those. Use this as an opportunity, not just something that's a challenge.
Great. Thank you, Ray. We have a question about security, cybersecurity. This affects all companies, as you both know, not just large enterprises, but we have a lot of small and mid-sized companies that are affected. So can both of you share what in this crisis, when there's so many other things to worry about, what might be the right approach for, say, a small or medium-sized company to really focus on?
I'm just going to start. I'll make it extremely simple. If you're a small and medium-sized company, there's 2 things I would recommend. To perform a framework assessment based upon NIST to tell you where your challenges are, where your top critical holes are, loopholes are, and where you need to concentrate on your security, number 1. Number 2, perform a pen test. Having a company, a reputable company, come in and perform a pen test are going to definitely tell you where your holes are. So you've got your process and procedural holes through your NIST assessment, and you've got your technical holes through your pen test. Do those. Any size company should be doing both of those items.
And just for those who don't know what pen test means, right?
So performing a test by hiring typically a third party that will, and I would use the word typically, come in, or would come into your network and try to attack your network in a exercise fashion. They'll come out with a report and they'll tell you how deep they penetrated your network, how much of the security and they've breached, how much of their intellectual property they could get, how much information that they could take away, and how long they could stay in your network without being seen. This type of an exercise is critical, not only to be done now, but to be done in general.
Great. Thanks, Ray. And how about you, JP? Any other insights?
Sure. I'll build on what Ray said. I think he addressed one side of the equation, which is dig up the dirt, dig it quick, leverage a third party who's qualified to do it. but get started now. Don't wait. I think that's a more important point. But when you do have a good vulnerability assessment report at hand, what do you do with that? I think people tend to put a 3-year plan around it. It doesn't work. The threats that you're going to see in a vulnerability assessment are real, and you have to take a risk-based approach. Look at the exposure, to your business model, to your customers, and whether you follow NIST or ISO or whatever standards you tend to follow, you're going to have to go through a quick mapping exercise to the business capabilities and its impact. And then once you've done that, I think you need to not be the business of building the Fort Knox yourself. There are a lot of players out there who are nimble, who are pretty economical, who can manage this for you more in a subscription or demand-based usage sort of cost scenario. Allows you to get started. You don't have to have a lot of money behind it, but as you make progress on your priority stack, I think you'll start to see that your overall cybersecurity posture is improving. That's a good story for your clients to hear. It's reassuring, for the folks in general, whether you're on the client side or whether you're on the provider side. So yeah, get started, dig it up, get started, and show progress and continually test it. I think at least on a yearly basis.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah,
we have a question about talent. Now, as both of you well know, there's a talent shortage in tech. Now, the question is, how do you think this crisis will affect that talent crunch that we have in the industry?
Go ahead, Ray. I'll let you pitch in first.
Well, I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing a hold on any hiring or any talent acquisition right now that's going on. I see but I would hope that would move forward quickly, because when this is over, we're going to need talent. We're going to need talent quickly. So what I do see is a lot of people for the last several weeks or months were in the pipeline of interviewing and to get hired, but the companies are all saying, let's wait a month or two and we'll get back to you. We are serious about you, but we want to wait. Not sure if that's the best idea. On the other hand, I've seen a number of people that I know personally that have gotten hired over the last few weeks, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge to spend the first several weeks remotely at a new position. A lot of what we do is built on trust and relationships, and that's very, very difficult.
And you, JP, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a similar theme evolving where everything is on a warm plate. Folks are not, killing these positions, but it's the fear of the unknown. What's going to be my, P&L? How's going to be my cash flow? Can I continue to fund some of these, projects? But one thing is given. At a senior management level, hiring continue to be very strong. The reason for that is you need good leaders to either come out of crisis and then continue to build on it. So I wouldn't worry too much about anything from a senior leadership stack to the executive stack. I think the middle tier is going to continue to be strong. It's just a question of when, probably, a delay of a quarter or so, maybe 3 months delay there for things to catch up. Entry-level positions, I think that's really where, I'm focusing more as I read and I try to understand on what's evolving. I think if you're going to see some adaptation and transformation, it's going to be at that entry-level tier, because there's an opportunity for you to now bring certain talent in that you were going to, either bring in it for a certain cause or train them for a certain cause. And I think that's really, you're going to see a lot of adaptation and transformation. And that's a given. It's going to happen. And I think overall, probably give it 6 to 12 months, you'll see the whole thing settling down. So that's sort of how I'm looking at and my analysis.
Great. What we actually do have a question from someone who is graduating or supposed to graduate in May. Should they be boning up on different skills now, or how can they be better prepared now that this crisis is upon us, or should they change tact in any way?
I
Go
can
ahead,
pitch
JP.
in. I can pitch in. I think I personally, it's again my operating style, and I practice what I preach here. And this is when times are tough and situation is fluid, don't change too many variants. I think wait to see how the next 4 to 8 weeks evolve. What traction is going to be needed or you're getting, and at that point adapt. It's no different than buying a stock. If you think the stock is falling and hey, it was at 100 and now it's at 60, and hey, it's a great time to get in, could be rock bottom. Well, I guess you got to get in at the right time, and it is better to buy that stock when it has hit 40 and could be at 65, but it's going to go up. There is a level of certainty and predictability. So take the same analogy. I like to use analogies in this scenario. Say, don't make too many changes to your strategy right now. Hold, be aware. Maybe if you want to educate yourself on additional, things around you, doesn't hurt to be always prepared. But wait at least 4 to 8 weeks to see how things settle.
Did you want to add anything, Ray?
No, I think what JP has said is 100%. I mean, that's just, I would make sure, don't be disillusioned. There are more than 500,000 open jobs in cyber out there today. There are programs that you can align yourself through federal programs in the government that are hiring people. There are programs out there through numbers of schools that the government will pay for your master's if you want to go on with your master's at certain schools, and then give 4 years back to the government at fair pay. So there's so many programs out there to stimulate a cyber individual. I would just continue to move forward with that. Most of the large corporations are very hungry for that type of person right now.
Got it. Now, one other question focused on managing up. So right now we're in a crisis. Right now, IT is super, super critical. Is there any strategy for educating the ownership or the management teams or the C-suites to invest more in IT? There's always a saying, never waste a crisis, right? So do you folks have any guidance there on leveraging this crisis to get more investment, more staffing, more resources in the near and longer term?
Yeah. I think the opportunity is to really right size and shuffle the stack, if you would. I think that's the real opportunity here. I don't necessarily think that getting more money is going to solve the problem. I think as you look at this and see, what held and what didn't hold well and what type of skills were crucial. We thought we had all the crucial skills, but we didn't. We thought we had a very good stack of technology and it held up well, or it needed some improvements, or we need to switch. So I think I see more of an opportunity of shifting of dollars around than necessarily investment going up. But again, I think to your point, Jim, never leave an opportunity on the table, right? So use it to some advantage to make things better.
Yeah, I agree. And again, a regular communication to the board. The next question, if I were on the board and would be asking, is What can I do to help you? What can you do to prevent what's happening to other organizations today happening to us? And have that list ready. Every time I know that there was some type of an event like this, I presented that list and I got approval to move forward with the items and the mitigations that I put together in that list.
Great. Well, we covered a lot of territory there. I want to thank both of you for coming on today and sharing your wisdom.